Okay, so I will bring up our keynote, Dr. Rumman Chowdhury. Definitely has been a great friend as I've started on this journey with Compiler, and one of the smartest people I know working on AI, and has done many amazing things that she's going to talk about, and a little bit about the future of humane intelligence, I think. So, Rumman.
Esteemed guests, friends, and colleagues from around the globe, it's both an honor and a responsibility to be with you at this pivotal moment in history. We find ourselves navigating geopolitical shifts that are reshaping civil society, international relations, and multilateral institutions like the United Nations itself. These changes have only heightened our collective urgency to ensure that emerging technologies, especially artificial intelligence, are harnessed with the utmost humane intelligence, wisdom, stewardship, and respect for the world's diverse communities. Across the planet, the decisions that we're making about AI today, how it will be used, for whom, by whom, and where, will reverberate for decades. And let's be clear, achieving AI that is ethical, effective, and contextually appropriate is not a theoretical exercise. Its success depends on highly technical details, the use cases, the algorithms and models, and importantly, who is in the room in design, development, and testing. These decisions are not just about code or silicon, they're about equity, sovereignty, and the future of our societies. As a social scientist, I can unequivocally attest that it's possible to design technically sound AI solutions and robust evaluations that interrogate the most urgent socioeconomic linkages of our time, the links between climate change, income inequality, public health, gender rights, and AI, just to name a few. Humane Intelligence, the nonprofit, has pioneered exactly this kind of work, supporting organizations, public and private, and in asking not just, can AI do this, but should AI do this, and for whom should we optimize? But let's be candid, these are not straightforward questions. And these contextual evaluations, those that truly surface the lived realities of vulnerable and underrepresented communities, are resource intensive, and they are rarely scaled. Conversely, the majority of current scalable approaches are designed for convenience, not relevance. They're optimized for data-rich environments, leaving out low and middle income countries, and perpetuating the very global divides that we seek to close. At Humane Intelligence, through both our nonprofit and our public benefit corporation, we have shown that this gap can be closed. We're at the forefront of frontier AI evaluations, working with leading industry, government, and civil society partners to professionalize and democratize the evaluation of AI system. At our nonprofit, we've established a network of over 3,500 expert evaluators that have enabled context-aware testing that reflects the diversity of the world. Across both organizations, our mission is one. We're building trust and safety into the very fabric of AI. And I want to take a minute to talk a bit about the mission of both organizations, what they're doing, and also how they're different from each other. So, of course, one of the most important things I did this year was onboard a new executive director, and you'll be meeting Mala later today. I'm so glad that Mala was introduced to me via Rebecca Weiss, actually, and ML Commons. And she's been a very powerful leader with a very clear and distinct mission. And Mala will talk probably a bit about her background and where, her inspirations, which are actually quite different from mine. And I'm very glad about that. And that enables the for-profit to focus on creating the infrastructure of evaluations. With us today, we have other members of our team, Julie Hollek and Sarah Amos, who I can't see right now, and Theo Skeadas, who have been working with us to actually operationalize a lot of the work that we are doing into an evaluation orchestration platform. So I'm happy to talk to you about what we're doing and what we're working on. So we believe that being technical is not enough, nor is just being conceptually ethical, if our frameworks are not globally inclusive and actionable. So the Public Benefit Corporation is delivering scalable enterprise-grade evaluation infrastructure, empowering organizations to move from pilot to scale. Meanwhile, the nonprofit organization is going to spearhead open source tooling and AI for good innovation, ensuring that the benefits of the technology reach all, not just a privileged few. So you might ask, why is this so urgent? Well, we know that this is now estimated to be a $1 trillion plus market that is going to impact everybody, whether or not we wanted to. And a big part of that will be defining evaluations. And again, as a social scientist, I'll say the person who owns the measurement owns how the model is used. And that's where we are. And this is where we want to bring people into the room. And I just want to close by saying, if you have if you want to partner with us, work with us, both organizations, we are remaining actually closely tied. That's why we're actually keeping the same name across both orgs. We're really excited to talk to you, whether you are an agency, a corporation, a government entity, a nonprofit. We probably have something that will be of interest to you. So with that, I will close. And thank you so much for coming.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kumar. I am the Interim Executive Director of Humane Intelligence, the nonprofit. With every wave of technology, there is a new crop of people that discover that digital divides exist and that electrification in low and middle income countries is still an issue and that tech is hyper-concentrated in some countries. And as great as it is to see the inspiration, sometimes the conversations can get a little bit repetitive because, as we all know in this room, the conversations that we're often having with AI have happened with cloud computing, with mobile revolution, with UX research and design, with open source software. They've happened over and over and over again. So what we're focused on in this event, in this panel, is not just the fact that we're, at an inflection point with a lot of these technologies. It's what is substantially different with AI and the SDGs.
So a little bit about me. I am working as part of the strategy team at Digital Green. I've also had a very interesting and diverse career. I've also spent some time at the UN. I ran my own NGO in Albania, which is where I'm from. And I've also spent some time in academia and working with corporates. All of this journey, I've always thought about sort of design as an entry point to solutions that work for diverse populations. And then also, how do we scale and go from pilots to bigger things? And all of this has brought me to Digital Green. I'll share a little bit about what we do now, and then we can go into the details. But Digital Green has been around for over 15 years. We've always worked with smallholder farmers. And right now we have about a year and a half, we've launched Farmer Chat, which is an AI assistant that helps smallholder farmers around the world triage questions in real time. It's deployed in 13 languages. We now have about 300,000 users that have asked about 3.8 million questions. And they're coming back weekly. So we're seeing users that we've got about 30 to 40% of the users that are active on Farmer Chat platform every week. And we are also getting a sense of the kind of questions they're answering and the adoption and the traction that they're getting on the ground. So it's an exciting technology. Happy to dig into how we're doing what we're doing and the kind of challenges that we're facing.
I've been studying melting of the ice sheets for about 25 years. But about 10 years ago, I thought that I needed to invest my time in more impactful ways. So I'm continuing doing my field work. I lead expeditions to Greenland. We study sea level rise. I do all the things that you dream about, carrots in the ice, cores, and all these kind of things. But also I've been investing my time a lot in climate justice. And one of the aspects that I've been decided to commit to is the production of data. And try to overcome the barriers that often exist between the knowledge that we know at social level of facts or hazards occurring, and the lack of proof, so to say, from a data point of view. So I try to fill that gap, and I've been working with the New York City panel of climate change, and I've been contributing to this aspect for the past years. So
So I actually had to look up where we are with SDGs. It's one of these things that's always been around, but what's happening, it's maybe not always top of mind. And I mean, it's bleak, right? We're on track for about 35% of the SDGs, and many of them, progress is either stalled or we're actually seeing some sliding back. And these are some of the critical ones like poverty and hunger, etc., climate change. So clearly there's a lot to be done. That's setting the stage. The second point is that everybody, you mentioned it, we already have talked about it, there is this inflection point. Everybody's talking about the AI hype, but data is showing, for example, ChatGPT, OpenAI, there's about 2.5 billion queries, I think, a week that are coming in, and only about 15% of them are from the US. So there's this global, at least, traction that we're starting to see. So, okay, combining these two things, what's the promise with SDGs? I see three things, at least, that have come through the work that we're doing with Digital Green. The first thing is around costs. So costs of AI are just really changing really rapidly. Every year, it seems like there's a 10x lowering of cost. There's this Cambrian explosion of so many different models that are doing a lot of different things. And at the same time, it's one of the fastest depreciating assets in tech right now. So what does that mean? It means that we can build things faster and a lot cheaper. We can build solutions, and people that necessarily don't have the technical know-how can do that. And then we can also deploy them and get these solutions to the hands of people that might not have access to them before. At Digital Green, one of the things that we've always worked on is to get one farmer to adopt one new practice. It costs about $35 to change and to introduce them to this practice and get them to adopt it. We worked a lot on video-based advisory. That brought it down some. But what we're seeing with our AI deployment now is that the cost has gone down to about 3.5 cents. So that's 100 times cheaper to get this technology to smallholder farmers. And they're saying that they have access to so much more information than they did before, rather than one practice at a time. So cost. The other thing is around, okay, so you're getting a new technology, but can people actually use it? So the second thing that seems to be really critical is around the usability. People talk about AI as this like super fancy technology. Where I've seen the biggest difference is leapfrogging in how people can use it. I'm seeing farmers that the entry point is no longer typing and literacy. About 45% of these millions of queries that we're getting are actually pictures or voice. It means that we can kind of like set aside these capability barriers and see this expansion of intelligence and AI privilege beyond what was possible before. And then the third thing is, okay, so now they have it and now they can use it, but is the information any good? And the thing that we're seeing is this potential. Before it was these like static, agronomic, often stale advisory that you would pass on to farmers. But now with AI, we can take what a farmer is asking, and we're doing this with nudges. We can combine that with real-time market and weather data. We can see what other farmers are asking in the vicinity. And many of you might be familiar with Waze, which is like real-time trafficking. You can kind of do that at real time for farmers and really create these like really interesting data loops. So this is the rose-colored glasses. Obviously, technology is good. It's powerful. It's really interesting. But technology advancement enough is not going to do this. I think there are asymmetries that are really big in how this technology is getting deployed. We started touching upon this already. For example, we know that in developed countries, the use cases are a lot more. When you do see it in emerging markets and places where people are living in poverty, within the SDGs, you see that some SDGs like health or education have a lot of use cases, but others don't. And then finally, at the individual level, we're starting to see research that shows that some individuals profit more than others. So considering all of these things together is like, there is the potential there, the pathways are there. Can we take advantage of it?
For me, it's regulatory framework is, of course, the fundament, right? No, we heard the current administration is not putting any regulatory framework to AI. This is something that it makes me feel like unleashing like a herd of bulls in front of a school as the kids are leaving to go home, and you hope that nobody gonna get hurt. That's really dangerous, I think. Funding is fundamental. My experience with EJ40 from the Biden administration to give 40% of grants to socially vulnerable communities to elevate properly so the work that they did over the past decades, that has had huge impact, not only on the practical aspects, but also on the barriers that we can tackle down to construct the relationships that we need from the academic and corporate point of view, and relate to the needs of socially vulnerable populations and what really is happening there without the assumptions of knowing it. And so the co-production and the co-creation that EJ40 was stimulating has been fundamental to rebuild that, which I'm not sure now how much is left. And so in this regard, the funding is fundamental, and together with the regulatory system. Education is, of course, every time you have a stressed system, and the American educational system is very stressed, everything that highlights more stress is going to create larger cracks. And AI and climate change together, they are emphasizing and catalyzing the divides that already unfortunately exist in this country. The question is really, how do we mute that effect? Nowadays, there's a lot of people, they go towards politics. And I think politicians, they have to start understanding, go more to our people. I know it's not easy. We are seeing what happens here when you have a candidate as a mayor in New York who can receive a lot of success and support. I think the ask has to come from below, and we need to start seeing politics as a way for us to express more the needs that we need in regulatory systems for AI and climate together.
Great, thank you so much. Totally agree with what you're saying. There's obviously some world orders that are emerging with the governance of AI at the national and international levels. So one of the things that we obviously have to combat that or mitigate that or work with that is co-creation and design. So Jona, can you talk to us about safeguards and design and what that means to put a super powerful technology at the hands of subsistence farmers globally?
Yeah. That's a great question, and one that we think about all the time. So I read recently, and it stuck with me, but the quote was that the AI that you're using today, the model that you're using today, is probably the worst model that you ever use. These technologies are getting better. And there's this idea that there's this sort of magic, right? We input something and then we get this answer. We don't exactly know. It's opaque. And the other thing that organizations like us have to figure out, it's like, there's this jagged boundary, right? And AI is good at some things and not good at others. And knowing those capabilities and keeping up with how those capabilities are changing is really critical. The toolkit is not there yet. Everybody's thinking about like evaluations, upstream, downstream models. We are building that as we go. There's a lot of work to do, and we'll talk a little bit, I guess, more about like how the community can collaborate later. But to share about digital green in particular, I guess I'll give one example on the data and the bias side, and how we're thinking about more inclusive AI that works for farmers, that can be deployed safely for farmers. And I'll talk one thing about the design side, because I think both aspects are critical. When it comes to the models, this is not that unique, but the data is not really representative of the kind of use cases that we want. A lot of the agriculture knowledge is quickly going stale just because of climate change and all of the changes and the volatility. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that these data sets are underrepresented in places like India, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, where we're really deploying in case. So the challenge that we're struggling with is how do we really build these data sets and also keep them evergreen so they can be updated and also reflect the values and and so we've started building a cohort of annotators and taking a look at building what they're called these like golden data sets. They can help us better understand the perspective of farmers and incorporating and aligning to their values. And we're doing that in a multilingual way. Rather than doing these data sets in English, can we build them in these languages so they can also help train the models in the languages that are low resource right now. So this is really critical and important. And it does provide some safeguards, but it's a process and it's a long-term process. Now, the design aspect is really critical too, because a lot of the model's benefits and risks are actually realized at the deployment stage rather than building and enriching and fine-tuning stage. And so we're thinking a lot about how do we make it easier for smallholder farmers that haven't interacted with this powerful technologies before to take advantage of it. There's this idea of capability accountability overhang. I see a box. I don't know what to ask. I speak often when I go with women farmers, and, everybody knows to ask about pest and disease because it's something that's there. But I ask them, have you thought about, you want to plant cabbage, your husband wants to plant corn. What are negotiation tactics? What are the ways in which you can have a conversation with your husband to bring your perspective forward? And something like the AI can support with those kind of things. The use cases are large. How do we discover it? Somebody once said that it's kind of like Battleship. I have kids, so I always also think in games. You're just throwing things and you're hoping to get something on the other side. If we can make it more accurate, then we can help them get the most out of it. And then I'll say one more thing. We have to think about safety, basically like the capability, reliability curve. We have to know where we are at any given time. But, and this is maybe my controversial take, is that we can't be paternalistic about deployment. People that I speak to all the time in these contexts are finding AI and are using it. And then we also can't assume that like farmers are poor decision makers. They have all of these ways and networks and ways in which they assess advisory, they adapt advisory, they negotiate advisory. So, I'm also like against that camp that says there has to be perfection before you deploy anything. It's like there's a lot of powerful things there. How do we do the best we can with the right safeguards in place? Yeah.
So you've done some work, Marco, with open source and remote sensory and AI. So how is that critical to climate AI adoption?
Well, I think, I started coding, and I'm going to give up my age, early 2000s. So at that time, it took days to do something that now I can do in a second. I can type in, I want to see, and now natural language models for geospatial analysis are coming up. So you can type in, I want to see the changes around this area and get me the satellite data, and then we'll do everything. So there's a big change in the way we do things. The question is, the world has always been complex. I think we're asking harder questions. And we're trying to understand the details of something that is very obscure or very simple to understand at global level, but the ramifications of its effects and hazards on where, when, how strong, how often, and for how long will happen, I'm talking about the climate hazards, is very hard to predict. Artificial intelligence, of course, AI, machine learning, they can help us definitely to build a less uncertain, localized information that can be used for certain purposes. The question becomes, if I train a model in New York City and I apply it in Galveston during a flood, it's not going to work. Or it will only favor the people whose data has been used to train the model. Think about you have a kid. Think about you teach the kid that you only like chocolate. And then at some point you offer something different. The kid is going to try to match it because he wants to please you. And that's what the models do. The models are always giving you an answer. They try to give you the best answer they can. But they are failing in those regards in many times. So the question becomes the importance of community data. There are two main reasons I can think of right away. The first one is we need to create and co-create and empower communities to have their own AI models, their own playgrounds. We need to have web platforms where people with no higher education can build blocks and grab a block of data from the satellite and grab another block, put it together and see what happens. They need to experience. Experience builds knowledge. This is truth. You can spend all life on your books. I will never learn the things I learned stepping on the ice of Greenland. And therefore, collecting this data, also the second point, it builds trust. You don't want somebody coming to your house and telling you what to do to fix something that you know it's broken. You want somebody to tell you how much it's going to cost you, how can you fix it better, and how can you make it so that it's not going to break again. That's what you want. You have the right to do so, and that's what these communities want. And as long as we don't create a relationship of trust, at least I'm speaking from an academic point of view, especially if we do not give up on ideas such as academia knows more than people. Hard science is more important than social science. You guys can pay me later of human intelligence. But social science is a science. I work with social scientists all the time now, and it's one of the best things that happened to my career. Because I love my numbers. I know that I can go to the third decimal point, but then I know that that number has to go somewhere. And if I don't translate that in policy, and if that don't reach people, then all the taxpayers' money that has funded my work, because that's where the money comes from, is going to be wasted. And when I walk around and I see people in South Bronx, in other places in Brooklyn, that are already exposed to climate issues, and there are tools that can be built to mitigate those issues. We can monitor floods with AI. We can predict if one street is going to be flooded or not in Harlem, and avoiding the people with high diabetes or a lot of diseases, they are forced to either get stuck in their house or not be treated properly. We can do this, but we need to build the trust. And we build the trust only by empowering the communities and acknowledging their identity, doing some restorative work from a cultural point of view, and also building something that is intergenerational. Because as they said before, whatever we do today is a tsunami that is going to hit people in the future. And it's not going to be like a small wave. It's going to be bigger and bigger. And we have the responsibility today to do our best, little by little. We can't fight Google, we can't fight Microsoft, but we can make better lives for the people we care about and those who care about these communities, so that the message and the action can propagate within the communities.
So we're now coming to the end of 2025. Technically, the SDGs end in 2030. So we have to contend with what's next, given the massive windfall of cuts that the UN is facing, the ever-prevalence of AI and all technological advances, and how that is going to steer the entire world. So, question for both of you is, how does AI interplay with the SDGs and what comes next? Should it help us decide what's next? Is it something that should be set aside and autonomous, or are we missing a huge opportunity by not including it in the SDGs or SDG plus?
Obviously, there's room for improvement, right? It's like there's a lot of critics to the SDGs. One funny thing that I read was that it was comparing it to like a Christmas tree, that everybody had an agenda and they put it in, and it's this mismatch of all these hundreds of indicators and things that people don't know and things that are in tension with one another, right? So, but it's still important. It's still important for us to think and come together around these. But how do we do it better? What can we do this time that we don't have next time? So I think AI is just a tool. It depends how we will use it. There's two possibilities that I can, immediately think of, is that one is this idea of like richer data and like thinking through data. It's like, how do we take these like legacy SDGs and refresh them? And what does the data and like the information tell us about really how to think of them in different ways? We are, like we said, with predictive models and with new types of data sets, there's a possibility to actually bring in the perspective of people that maybe have been left out of the political conversations that really drove SDGs the first time around. So I think there's opportunities there, but how it's yielded, it really remains to be seen. I think that, yeah.
Well, I think there is a lot of opportunities, and you can discover patterns. We can identify holes. I mean, somebody was mentioning there is some SDGs have receiving more attention than others. You can, of course, identify new ways of grouping SDGs. You can ask ChatGPT to do that. I think one on a technical aspect, I wanted to offer a practical consideration and then a general one. The practical consideration is we have tools now that can allow us to understand the attribution, the drivers of different models. Suppose that you have a model that try to understand this room and who is playing a major role in interacting with us. AI can actually identify the people who have more action. And the same way you can actually identify with aspects of SDGs or with aspects of the processes that were behind some of the SDGs that you want to understand better were responsible, how they changed over time. So you can see this aspect, policy was more important than other things, or salaries was less important, and so on. So there is also an opportunity to do a retrospective analysis to understand the causes, and not only understand what we failed, but also to learn from the processes that we cannot model from a theoretical point of view, but the AI allows us to build models in an experimental epistemological way. The question is, the more we use AI, the more we emit CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, I know we are well aware we left the bad news at the end so you could enjoy part of the evening, but the reality is, if we cannot find a way to, I wouldn't say power, but just control the energy, and in some way to address this on a long term, not only as an energy source, but also as a business model for energy distribution. If you are, I don't know if you're aware, but there are people and universities who are building micronuclear reactors, and they are supposed to be safe. You can change a nuclear battery every 9 years. And they're doing that so that they can power their data centers so that they will go zero CO2 emission. Okay. Now, of course, you have to do all the considerations and everything else, but the question becomes more: if you cannot afford energy power so that you can train models, how can you run your models if you're a community? So the energy, the access to the energy to be able to run these models in a fashion that is sustainable is becoming, for me, another aspect of digital colonialism, which mixes with energy justice. And so one thing that I think it's very important for SDG Plus in the future is not only to have considerations about the energy, but also considerations about how we are not going to repeat the same mistakes we did with fossil fuels. When there is a race towards new technology, that's exactly what happened. You got stocks, you got to start burning things, you got selling apps, you burn the market, and then you look back and say, oh, we killed half of the animals to do that. So we have a chance now to learn from the past. There are different technologies, but to me CO2, because it's connected to climate and it's such a rush, and it's more about the potential that you can have. And the same with AI, it's the potential that you can spy on somebody, potentially you have a next brilliant drone that can mess up with the other drones. So how do we really frame this energy demand distribution is going to be a social, it is for me a social issue, and needs to be addressed now, even from microgrids, empowering communities with their own technology, energy, and thinking about it in a very practical way. So to me, that is a very big goal for SDGs, if they really want to be coherent.
All right, thank you so much, Jona and Marco, for that.
Being stupid. So I'm Linda Raftree. Thanks for sticking around for our second panel. We have instructions to be snappy, to keep you guys awake. So that's the goal for our panelists. We have a really interesting group tonight. Really quickly, in a couple of words, what top 2 or 3 issues are you most concerned about when it comes to AI?
I'd say, from my perspective, 3 big challenges. Number one, we've got hundreds of billions of dollars getting spent every year now on AI, right? Data centers and building AI models and so on. And there's 4 billion people in the world out of 8 billion who live on less than $2,000 a year, not a month, but per year. There's, 1 billion people that live on less than $500 a year. And none of these hundreds of billions of dollars that are being spent on AI, virtually none of it is going to how do we help these 4 billion people at the bottom. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number 2 is governments. At the end of the day, if we really want to impact these 4 billion people who need, who could use the transformative power of AI to improve their healthcare, their education, their livelihoods, their skills training, we have to work with government. We have to work with government to increase their understanding of what AI can and cannot do. We have to work with government to develop responsible AI systems and so on and so forth. And how do we do that effectively? That to me is the second challenge. The third challenge is the following. At conferences like this, there is typically a tendency to criticize big tech, the fact that all our solutions come from the richest countries in the world. It's true. All of that is a problem. But what is the solution? And the only solution to me is to actually develop in the global south a pool of talent that understands AI. That means we need to develop an academic ecosystem or ecosystems in the global south for AI. We need to develop research ecosystems in the global south for AI. We need to develop skills training ecosystems in the global south for AI, because that's then how you start developing solutions at scale and talent at scale in the global south. Big challenge. That to me, in fact, of all of these is the single biggest challenge. At all these conferences, we keep 80% of the focus goes on what's wrong. Only 10 or 20% goes into, okay, now what do we do? But those to me are the three big challenges that we need to try and address. And in the later part of the discussion, we can talk about how do we do that.
I think I have two things in mind. One is a matter of hubris, and the other is a matter of incompetence. The first is hubris. It is amazing how many rooms I walk into where people want to talk about what an incredible innovation ecosystem we've built around AI. How the best and the brightest are working at our companies to create new talent. And I'm just struck by every one of those meetings when I just want to stand up and scream. The best and brightest, technology, talent, and otherwise, aren't sitting in rooms of a few hundred or a few thousand people following a paycheck. They're out in the communities that I work with around the world. They're CTOs of nonprofits. They're CIOs of town governments. They're trying to figure out how we build technology that transforms people's lives. The best and the brightest are the people who are working to create a human future. So let's start with taking out the hubris. Where is the best and the brightest? They are in our communities. They are the people in this room. They are the people who are building organizations that will transform our future. The second is this question of, well, if that's the case, if there are people all across the way, why are we so content to talk about innovation as if it's a characteristic of technology? That we innovate new products or models or new data centers. We innovate the ways and infrastructure of building a technology infrastructure. Great. But we, because of that, force ourselves into a path where our society transforms so quickly that we fail to acknowledge the people who innovate what our societal institutions look like. What are the things we build to make sure not just that people are protected, but that every person on the planet has a pathway and an institution that supports them to realize economic dignity, to realize a pathway to realize a full set of human rights, to believe that they can participate in whatever this world is that we are creating. If we want to talk about innovation, let's talk about it properly. Not merely as the people who can sit down and say, I can aggregate the most capital in some faraway place in the middle of a desert where the things they are building will harm our planet, and instead talk about innovation as a mechanism of defining what our future looks like. If we could solve those two twin challenges, I think everything else fits into place pretty nicely.
Sure. So as Linda mentioned, I have seen many things from a philanthropic perspective, and the earlier panel talked specifically about some of the funding challenges. We will talk a little bit about what some potential solutions could be, but for right now, the two things that keep me up at night are I have children, so my metaphors all relate to my children. But number one, we've talked about this, you've experienced this. If you're at all in the AI space at all, or using it, or thinking about it, or reading about it, there is a level of scale there that is actually quite scary. Many years ago, someone described the AI revolution as exponential growth, and we have truly seen that. And if you have children, you can relate that, when your children are small, you're very stressed about them. And their problems are actually small, but they're big, they're significant. When your children grow up and get bigger, my kids are now teens, their problems become bigger. And so bigger kids, bigger problems, bigger toys, bigger problems. So the size of the industry is the problem, because we have not developed the regulatory frameworks or the guardrails to actually be scaling safely and responsibly. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the second piece is that lack of safety and the lack of funding in the space. While we will talk about it, the philanthropic space is quite small. And I know that is actually quite hard to understand, but if you take all the capital in the world, and most of this is capital coming from the developing world or the developed countries, it is
Actually, let me ask you, how big do you think that is? How big do you think that is as a percentage of official development assistance? Let's talk about that since we're talking about the SDGs. Shoot out a number. There are no wrong answers. If you took my class, you would know the answer, but how much is the philanthropic part of the pie of all ODA? Okay, as a percentage. Okay, you are all much better than my class. It is total 7%. 7%. And it is 5% without the Gates money. It's 7%. And so, number one, the philanthropic community is really small. That means the funding landscape that could fund the infrastructure that is needed is actually quite small. And number two, there's very small amounts of investment going into the guardrails and the infrastructure. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So those are the things that are keeping me up at night about this topic.
Yeah, especially with all of the current cuts and this idea that, philanthropy will step in and kind of save us. That's a little bit of a reality check.
Okay, so here's some examples of what can be done about this at a real world kind of level, right? I'm from India, grew up there. India, of course, as we know, 1.4 billion people, of which, we've made a lot of progress over the years. But at the end of the day, over a billion people still don't have access to good quality healthcare, good quality education, good livelihoods, etc. So we have a ways to go, and this is just typical of what's happening in the global south, right? Again, progress is being made, no question, but there's a long way to go. And of course, the whole focus of this discussion, how can AI make a difference? So I'm basically an entrepreneur, so I'm action-oriented. I've started several companies here in the US, taken a couple of them public, etc. So 30 years ago, when I was taking one of my companies public and flying, on all these flights, it just struck me how fortunate I'd been. I was born into a middle-class family at a time in India when maybe 10% of families were middle class, 90% were poor. And the middle-class family happened to value education, so they gave my brothers and me a great education at great sacrifice. Because of that, I happened to go to a good college in India. Because of that, I happened to get to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, got a master's, which helped me start my first company, which, by the way, went down the tubes. Wasn't funny when it happened. Then I started my second company, which did better, etc. But it struck me that if I'd been born a quarter mile away in a slum in Delhi, the city where I was born, life would have been totally different. So I need to help. So for 30 years, I've been working in the I've been funding different organizations in the social sector, giving them money for scale up. Most people who give money for programs. I was saying, look, you're doing great work in 10 villages. Can we make it 50 villages or 100 villages? Interestingly, 10 years later, none of them was able to scale up. And we won't get into the reasons for all of that now. But 10 years back, I finally decided I'll do it myself. So I started my first nonprofit foundation in India in the public health space. And the basic mission was, how do we transform primary healthcare systems in underserved communities, which was 60% of India, using technology and innovation. This is before AI was a thing, right? And we've scaled up and we run several thousand clinics in India in partnership with government. We treat over 20 million people a year with free healthcare. That's going nicely. Through this time, I happened to be serving on the board of trustees of Carnegie Mellon, where I'd been a student many years earlier. And Carnegie Mellon is one of the global leaders in AI. So I was seeing up front all of these great developments. This is pre-Gen AI, okay? This is in around 2015, 2016. And I could see all these billions of dollars going into AI generally, but like I was saying in my introductory remarks, none of it was going into how do we use AI to help the bottom 4 billion. So I spoke to my brother, who's also a tech entrepreneur in the US, and I said, why don't we start a nonprofit foundation? Let's use India as the base, but the goal will be the global south. And how do we use AI to actually have ground level impact at large scale? How do we impact hundreds of millions of people, potentially billions of people, by improving education for their children, improving healthcare, improving livelihoods, and so on? So we started that. Prime Minister Modi, the Prime Minister of India, came and inaugurated it. Long story short, 6 years later, we've got 250 full-time AI, machine learning experts, product engineering experts, domain experts in health education and so on. And we've developed over 25 AI platforms in all of these areas, healthcare, education, and so on. So as an example, in the global south, there is an incredibly high dropout rate in the early grades in school, especially young girls. So the government of Gujarat, one of the largest states in India, called us and said, look, we have this issue, but blah, blah, blah. Long story short, we analyzed that it's the lack of reading fluency that causes this high dropout rate. Because if you can't read comfortably, you'll struggle at all of your subjects. We've developed an AI-based set of solutions to assess each child as an individual on where they're struggling, diagnose what needs to be done, help the teacher with individual learning plans for each student. And this is, how do I say, it's proving itself so quickly in the field that the state of Gujarat, population maybe 50, 60 million, has made it mandatory for all 5 million school kids in early grades. Last month, the state of Rajasthan, a population 70 million, made it mandatory for all their kids. Next month, state of Madhya Pradesh, So by next year, this is going to become a national standard, according to the health ministry. One little example of what one solution can do. Imagine this through the global south, right? So that's happening. I'm almost done. So we've got things like this for newborn health, maternal health, agriculture. The lady, Jona, from Digital Green, who was speaking on the earlier panel, sorry, Jona, we've developed the same agriculture chatbot for farmers. It's being used by millions of farmers in India, etc. As we've done this, we work at a second level, which is working with the central government in India, the federal government, as well as its states on AI policy. How do you develop data governance standards? How do you develop frameworks for responsible AI? And the work that we do, they really appreciate because it's informed by actual real world, what works and doesn't work. It's not abstract, it's not academic. So now we work with multiple ministries in India. We've helped them develop all of this. We help them develop AI roadmaps. So for the health ministry, over the next 3 years, how do we make the entire health system in India AI enabled? How do we make the education system AI enabled and so on? Finally, what we do is also now the government then said, look, all of our senior civil servants really don't know AI, what AI cannot do, etc. So starting last year, we set up a big capacity building effort, and we've trained several thousand senior civil servants that basically run the government. What can AI do? What can it not do? What kind of data sets do you need? What governance standards do you need? Blah, blah, blah. So all of this is happening in India. And now, literally this month, we're starting in Africa, in Kenya, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. And we've met with senior government officials there. And they're basically saying we need all of this today. The last thing I'll mention is that on the whole point that I made about teaching and research in the Global South, last year, I launched at my alma mater, the Indian Institute of Technology, a school of AI, which in 1 year has become the largest AI school in India, 400 people from all income levels, 70 faculty, 7 research centers, the biggest of which is a center on responsible AI. The government of India has made my dean of that school the kind of national chair on responsible AI. And now we are setting up a campus in Tanzania in the next couple of months. And we're talking to the Dubai government about setting up something there. The point of mentioning all of this stuff is not to brag or anything about what we've done. It's just to make 2 points, 3 points. Number one, think action. We can talk about all the challenges in the field till the cows come home. How do we address these issues? Secondly, government is a key partner in implementing at scale. We have to figure out how to engage, work with government. And 3, we got to do this with a sense of urgency. And the only point I made about this 12 months about this AI school, this is what we can do if we all get together.
I want to talk a little bit about the power of the ideas that I think we share in this room and the role of philanthropy to advance them in a meaningful way. And I think about this really in a tiering that starts from where all of us sit, but also where every person across this city and across this country and across this world sit, which to me is not so much about do they know about AI or not. It's actually a very different question. It's do people feel like they have a sense of participating in a decision about what that future looks like? I alluded to this earlier. But I think about it really in the context of agency in a digital world. I think about the fact that when I go and talk to people in communities across this country and I say, what do the last 25 years look like in technology? They say, you know, a bunch of people built a bunch of things and we use them. We didn't really have a voice in deciding what the internet would look like. We definitely didn't have a voice in deciding what social media looks like. And somehow we inherit and own the negative consequences of it. And I think, unfortunately, we're in a time where a lot of people say, and AI is kind of going to be the same story. A bunch of people are going to build some AI stuff for us. They talk a lot. They use words like ethical practice and responsible design. But at the end of the day, I'm a consumer, I'm a customer, I'm a source of money, and somebody's going to design something that makes me pay for it. I think that's the starting point of what philanthropy can do. Because I don't think that philanthropic foundations or individuals should be sources of capital. I think that is such a reductive and terrible way to allow philanthropic institutions to act without accountability. Think instead of them, hopefully, as institutions of public trust that are intended to build the social resiliency to the challenges of a hyper-capitalist world. If you took that frame, what would philanthropies do differently? Well, the first would be to establish that there are exemplars of where agency looks different. That we can actually build a world in which technology ownership isn't about what products we build for people, but about how we actually empower communities to say, we now know what kind of technologies we design for ourselves. That they feel ownership not just over the fact that they can build an application layer that then uses a commercial underlying model, but that they actually own the entire stack. They own the talent, which means that they have access to the education that you've spoken to, Sunil, the ability to feel like they can build a fully comprehensive solution within the form of their community, that they have access to the data that truly represents them, not just the data stacks that are commercially viable, that are collected for convenience or because they promote a for-profit cause, but because they're truly representative of the interests of a community. And they actually have access to the compute, the physical infrastructure of technology that lets them build the things that they need to build. Where can philanthropy play a role at each of those layers? To actually say, let's think about a new model for how we think about data creation and aggregation, where we're not just going out and saying what data exists in the world, pull it all together and we'll do what we can, but rather invest in the creation of new data sets that represent people in the form of the most vulnerable across the planet. That we actually think about compute not merely as where do we build data centers that are paid for and used by private sector companies, but are public resources, targets of public funding that actually build public infrastructure at scale. And again, at talent, where we think of this not as how do we train people to go and get a high-paying job in tech, but rather to be able to use some of the most incredible tools we've ever created to solve local problems. Philanthropy can play a role by taking us around the market conditions that force people into that kind of hegemony of ideas. In order to do that, we have to move off of a couple of different things. One, the idea that pilots or the fact that we kind of build things to try them out in the field is the primary method or architecture of action, I think has to go away. We have to throw it away with the 20th century. Pilots are important, but only when they're put into an ecosystem that says pilots turn into platforms, platforms turn into policy, that you have a full ecosystem where the idea that you're building technology turns into behavior and social change at scale. Who can do that? Well, I think academic institutions have played a role in designing what that infrastructure looks like, but the implementing partner to that needs to be philanthropy. I say all of this to you with an absolute understanding that in all of what I've said to you, philanthropies have also been some of the slowest and poorest adopters of technology-driven innovation. I say this to you as the head of a major foundation. A low probability event that I'm the head of a major foundation, but that's the conversation for the glasses of wine, Sunil. But like, foundations are very bad at this. In many ways, the ways that they've thought about technology-driven innovation and transformation has been, well, how do we do it for internal philanthropic operations? Or maybe, how do we fund a certain kind of transformation in the civil society organizations we want to support, but never with that cohesive idea that they can actually play a meaningful role. If we think about AI, something that requires a pretty significant investment in talent and resources and data, to ask every organization out there that's trying to do something like this themselves makes no sense. It's impossible to ask an organization that has a deep and thorough understanding of a social sector problem and the possible solutions to it and the communities they work in, to say, by the way, now you also have to bolt on an AI capacity. Go hire a chief AI officer and an AI team, and it just doesn't make sense. What if instead we built an underlying architecture that said there are shared institutions across civil society whose job is to provide that service, not for profit, but for purpose, to actually say we will serve as the aggregators of data, something that we built in something called Climate Trace, if you're familiar, to aggregate climate data from across the world, from nonprofits and private sector institutions, from satellites and governments, and make them available to the world so people can build on top of it. What if we could build philanthropically funded compute infrastructure? Place it in places like Kenya and Zambia, where I was a few weeks ago, in India, in Mongolia, in Chile, and say local researchers and talent can use this to build on top of it. It might lead to things like the new Chilean Spanish language LLM that'll be, I think has been publicly announced. It'll soon be publicly announced. We might cut that out of the recording. Soon to be announced, which is created by, it's been talked about, so I don't think I'm out in front of it. It's been created by governments, but by local academics investing and building on top of public infrastructure. So all of this to say, it's not really about what the next philanthropy says they are funding in AI. If we just followed that thread, we'd see a bunch of spots of light, as we have seen through kind of every social change attempt over the last 25 years. It's where do we actually get a collaboration of investment, not just in what AI does, but in who owns it, who gets to be a part of it, who builds it, for whom like AI becomes a part of the identity of their cultural transformation.
I have to say, I'm very inspired by the two people sitting next to me. And the reason for that is because they paint a picture of what, on the left-hand side for me, is what global development should look like. Very much prioritizing vulnerable communities, building capabilities, and building at a scale that is already proven, not necessarily discussing it, and just pitching it. And on the right side, really talking about how philanthropy should hold itself accountable. So I'm going to just right-size that for a moment because I think I'm so inspired. So in the philanthropic sector, we have the saying, and it is, one philanthropy, one philanthropy. Every philanthropy is basically incentivized to act within its own accord. And there is no regulatory body that oversees the accountability around philanthropy. And that is a problem. And that is a problem with what gets funded. That is a problem with concepts around scale, sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. And that is a problem now, in particular, given that much of the global development infrastructure in the U.S. is no longer funded. And I get phone calls every day from either people that have just left USAID or some other global development agency who's looking to transform their curriculum into philanthropy. And most recently, I was at a corporate philanthropy, so really thinking about private sector. And so for me, philanthropy is never going to be the solution. However, if those that are funding in this particular space, McGovern being a really good example of it, but also Ford Foundation thinking about its public good work. I just heard about Gates Foundation thinking about creating a standard around using AI for evaluation. We need more of those. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what I've seen in the past, because some of you have been around for as many decades as some of us have been around. AI is now the new shiny object. The previous panel spoke about the ebbs and flows of the MDGs to the SDGs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact investing space for a moment. I happen to have been at the Rockefeller Foundation when we launched the concept called impact investing. And what really was surprising to me is that we didn't start with impact investments, so funding the proliferation of investments, transactions. We started with the plumbing and the infrastructure. We started with the standards. We started with the measures. We started with the responsible piece. Fast forward, that was 2008. Fast forward to today. We do see the impact investing space has reached $1 trillion. AI will surpass that for sure. But the point of that is we need to be able to collectively start with the plumbing, and we don't have the plumbing yet. And so while we have really, really good ambition, we as foundations, as philanthropy, need to be funding the plumbing, need to be funding the capacity development, need to be funding the policy and the regulatory environments. And we're not there yet. But I am optimistic that there are these leading voices, McGovern being one of them, that can lead us in a different direction.
For me, a real takeaway is that there are many different types of philanthropies that do different types of things and are looking for different types of things. We've got folks that are quite interested in the plumbing, which sometimes feels incremental. It feels fundamental other times, or depending on who you speak with. And then you have foundations who are interested in those really kind of big wins. And so I think looking at the different roles of philanthropies across the sphere is really finding what are the philanthropies that are matched with what you would like to be doing and where your kind of organization is maybe. So I think really some very rapid closing statements. I was thought everything you all said was super interesting, and I wish we could be here longer. But maybe not a whole statement, but just a quick,
20 seconds.
20 seconds, yeah.
Well, I'll just say, I think we've said everything that had to be said. I think we're on the cusp of a very exciting period in social transformation. I think AI is going to be a huge force. Obviously, we've had some great ideas, and all of you have great ideas in terms of the challenges. How do we drive this forward in a way that's equitable, that's fair to everyone? But I think if we put our minds to it, the next 5 to 10 years could be truly transformational at a time when it's desperately needed. Because as you've said, Veronica, and as we all know, global development assistance is collapsing. Philanthropy, nonprofits, as I've said at least, have been kind of traditional and slow-moving and incremental. But I think if we apply our minds right and we use a truly transformative force like AI, I believe in the next 5 years, between now and 2030, we can take 1 billion people and radically improve the access to healthcare, radically improve access to education, to livelihood, to skills, etc. It's up to us to get it done.
I think that perhaps just to build on your comments, wouldn't it be great to live in a world where we actually achieve the SDGs in 2030, and perhaps AI can help us do that, how AI can help us achieve these outcomes. That is a little Pollyannish of me to think about, but the possibilities are all on the table, and I would just take away this concept of the global infrastructure has shifted. Philanthropy has a small role to play. Really, the conversation is about collaboration with private sector. And private sector, having just been there too, and working for a corporate that's 90,000 people big, largest mining company in the world, but I worked on the foundation side. So thinking about critical minerals, I learned a lot. I learned a lot around what it takes to scale. I learned a lot around what risks are. And I learned a lot about something that we say, and I would leave you with this. We say in the global development sector and in philanthropy that we care about impact. If you look at the definition of what impact is, it's about both positive, negative, intended, and unintended. We care way too much about the positive and the intended, and we don't have the abilities to know what it's like to think about the negative and the unintended. Private sector starts there. Private sector starts thinking about from a position of what are all the things that can go wrong, and let's solve for that. And I leave you with that thought.
I want to say thank you, Linda, for bringing us together in conversation, to you, Mala and Rumman and the whole team. This is such a great room to be in and so many friends. I hope you will excuse me. I've been a little bit skeptical today in my comments. And the reason for that is I spent the day in DC not talking about AI at all. Instead, trying to figure out how we feed some kids in one of the worst conflicts we have ever seen, kids who are the victims of some of the worst behaviors that people can do. I think we can do better. And I don't want to leave you on all of the problems we have today. But I will tell you kind of one quick line. I don't think of AI as an outcome. I don't really care about AI. I think of AI as a great Trojan horse. It's a way to enter into a conversation that brings us back to some really fundamental concepts about what we value, about what we will build, about who we think should build it, about what kind of world we want to create. And there I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope because of the people in the nonprofit sector, because of the leaders that I think actually exemplify everything, Sunil, that you're talking about. Incredible innovators who actually want to lead through example, who want to build community power at scale, who want to understand how we use technology not merely as a tool or something we purchase and buy, but as something that we own, build, and create. And for that, I am incredibly hopeful. And I think this room makes me really hopeful as well. So I want to thank you all for that. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much to you all.
Hi, everyone. I am Theo Skeadas, and I'm the Chief of Staff with Humane Intelligence. So at the beginning of this event, Rumman spoke about quite a few transitions with the Humane Intelligence Public Benefit Corporation, and with Mala stepping in as our interim executive director of the nonprofit. One thing, however, that is not changing is that we will continue to engage communities like the one we see here today. And so we want to leave with a few concrete ways to get involved.
Thank you. So, number one, last week we launched our new website. It includes a lot of information about our strategic shifts and our 2025 fundraising priorities, including our goal to release our AI red teaming web application as an open source software. We have at least one global expert on open source for Good, Mala, and then I'm also in OSS a little bit, at Humane Intelligence. So please come talk to us if you'd like to support our work.
We are continuing our work on our algorithmic bias bounty challenges. Our next challenge is about accessibility in conference facilities like Zoom. The challenge launches later this month and will be open to anyone who wishes to participate, and there will be cash prizes for the winners. We are also working on another launch in October with one of our panelists from tonight, Jona. And we are also working on an exciting announcement about the future of bias bounties. Please come talk to me or Mala if you'd like to hear more about this development.
We've also recently published 3 reports on intimate image abuse, AI red teaming in practice, and the UNESCO red teaming playbook. Those are all available to download for free on our website. Please come find us if you'd like to run your own red teaming workshop with us or have us come speak at your event about our work. We were recently at TrustCon, and we will be there at several events this week and here at UNGA.
And last but not least, together with Civitas, we run a metrology working group, which published a paper, Reality Check, a new evaluation ecosystem is necessary to understand AI's real-world effects. Our paper lays out how a real-world AI evaluation ecosystem can produce the information necessary to translate and contextualize AI system outcomes for organizational decision-making. You can sign up to join in this initiative through our website or come find me to learn more. Thank you so much and hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thanks, everybody.